Om Gam Ganapataye Namaha. Om Gam Ganapataye Namaha.
This is the original story of the Empty Robe, from which this YouTube channel gets its name. Vedananda told this story over lunch during a group pilgrimage to India in 1994. After this morning's puja, Martin asked me what I'm like when I'm not teaching. His implication was that my personality displays differently under different circumstances, which is true. But the way he asked it also hinted that he felt there was a, quotes, real me behind the, quotes, teacher facade. And it is true that there is a real me in here, but it may not be what you're expecting. Let me illustrate this with a story. During one of my visits to see my master Brahmananda, we had gathered as usual after the evening meal to hear Brahmananda talk and to ask questions. He sat at the edge of the veranda of his hut, and we, his chelas, sat on the ground in front round a fire. Towards the end of the evening, one of the newer chelas asked Brahmananda, "When will we see the real you?" Brahmananda said, "Do you really want to see the real me?" The chela nodded eagerly. Brahmananda smiled directly at him and disappeared. Well, he didn't just disappear. First, his body started to fade until it was transparent mist, and then it just faded away. But the whole process only took less than 3 seconds. But his robe was still there, looking as though his body was still in it. It looked as though Brahmananda was still there, but just invisible. A chela who was sitting on the veranda steps just below where Brahmananda was sitting reached out and touched where his arm had been. The chela's hand went right through. The body wasn't just invisible. It wasn't there at all. We all remained very still and very silent. After a few minutes, Brahmananda reappeared, slowly reversing the disappearing process. Then he smiled at the chela who had asked the question and said, "The real me is just an empty robe." If you reflect on that, you will see that it was a brilliant practical lesson in the 6 levels of reality. I think we all understood the lesson our master was giving us, but I'm not sure if anyone else noticed what I noticed. When the chela reached out to touch Brahmananda, we all saw his hand go right through where the arm would have been. But Brahmananda's arm was resting on his knee as he sat cross-legged. His arm was bare, but the robe covered his legs down to his sandals, and I noticed that the chela's hand went not only through the space where his arm had been, but also through his knee, including the robe. Brahmananda had left his robe looking as though it was still there, covering an invisible body. But the robe didn't exist either. It just looked as though it was there. Brahmananda did a lot more than just dematerialize himself. He dematerialized himself and his clothing, but left just the appearance of his robe. Now you can see why Martin's question to me doesn't make sense until you reflect on the 6 levels and reword the question accordingly.
Om Gam Ganapataye Namaha. Om Gam Ganapataye Namaha.